Welcome to Arkansas Wildlife. For the past several years, the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission has renewed its focus on restoring northern bobwhite quail populations to the natural state. This week, we're going to show you some of those programs and how you can help bring back the bobwhite. And a little later in the show, we're going to take some bobwhite quail into the kitchen and share a recipe with you that's our take on a classic dish served at Commander's Palace in New Orleans. But first, one of the best and most cost-effective ways to manipulate and manage wildlife habitat is prescribed fire. Our first segment this week, we'll show you how fire can be used to manage both public and private lands across Arkansas. Archery deer season is well underway in Arkansas, and we're less than a week away from the start of muzzleloading season. So here's a reminder that we have some new regulations regarding chronic wasting disease in the state. Most importantly, we've got a series of drop-off containers where hunters can leave deer heads to be tested for chronic wasting disease. You can find out more about that in the Arkansas Hunting Guidebook or go to agfc.com/CWD. Arkansas Wildlife is brought to you in part by Academy Sports and Outdoors. For all, for less. Arkansas landowners and land managers use many tools to create and enhance wildlife habitat in the natural state. One of the best and most cost-effective methods may also be one of the most misunderstood.
Prescribed fire is the use of fire as a management tool in a controlled manner on a specific land area to accomplish specific land management objectives. We do that in a way that reduces the danger to surrounding landowners, that reduces the danger to fire smoke sensitive areas inside the burn unit, and reduces smoke damage outside of the burn unit.
Although fire is often viewed as a destructive force, it also has the power to create healthy habitats and revitalize degraded ecosystems.
Fire has been an intricate part of natural ecosystems for as long as critters have lived on the land. You know, lightning strikes, volcanoes have started fires for millennia. Humans have used fire to manipulate the area around us for our benefit since we crawled out of caves. We know that Native Americans use fire very extensively, so the land in Arkansas specifically has a long ecological history with fire.
As the U.S. population increased and expanded into previously unsettled areas, fire suppression soon outpaced fire as a land management tool. For much of the 20th century, there were government policies and public awareness campaigns to suppress fire. The end result was that fire was largely abandoned as a land management tool for the first time in human history.
The landscape that we're managing with fire today is totally different than the landscape that Native Americans managed with fire. There weren't fire-sensitive features out there, there weren't roads, there weren't towns in the way. On the other side of that, we now have nearly 100 years of fire protection, accumulated fuels, plant communities that aren't functioning in the way that they need to function. So now we're kind of going full circle and putting fire back on the landscape through the things that fire has done for millennia.
Today, natural resource managers use fire to accomplish numerous goals for native plant communities and wildlife management.
But we use prescribed fire today as land managers to reduce dangerous fuel loads. We can use fire underneath native oak stands to encourage the generation of oak and pine. Use fire to eliminate species we don't want in these stands like maple and sweet gum. And in a field environment, we can use fire to maintain that field and prevent it from growing up into a forest.
Many of Arkansas's native plant species benefit from periodic fire.
Our upland oaks, white oak, post oak, blackjack oak, our native grasses are fire dependent. The grasses that go along with quail habitat, big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grasses, those wildflowers that are associated with that community. A lot of times that's the reason that we're burning. We're trying to clean off that dead litter layer, that dead grass layer, to let the live plants below them flourish.
Fire also benefits many natural state game animals as well as non-game wildlife, including some species that have seen better days.
Our upland species like quail, for example, are adapted to living in an environment maintained by fire. Deer and turkey, most game species also benefit. It keeps the vegetation young and fresh and more nutritious for the wildlife.
And it doesn't take long for a burned area to regenerate with desirable vegetation.
We typically see regrowth within a matter of days or weeks after a prescribed fire, and actually more plant growth than there was before the fire a lot of times.
Prescribed fire provides many benefits for landowners and the wildlife that use their land, but an improperly controlled fire can have negative consequences. The key to safely and effectively using fire as a management tool requires planning and preparation.
One of the core elements of properly using prescribed fire is knowing what that fire is going to do before you strike the match. So we know how topography influences fire behavior. We know how wind and humidity and fuel moisture influence fire behavior, and we're trained on that. And if the conditions are going to give us a fire behavior that is not conducive to our management goal, we won't burn that day. We don't light a prescribed fire unless we have sufficient control lines around that burn to contain it. That could be a creek, that could be a gravel road, that could be a trail. Often we construct fire breaks with heavy equipment, with bulldozers or tractors.
The next consideration is weather.
From a layman's perspective, that's often frustrating. Well, the sun's shining and the grass is dry, well, I want it burned. Well, there's a lot of factors that we have to take into account. Humidity is very important. It's got to be dry enough to burn, but not too dry that the fire is going to be uncontrollable. Atmospheric stability is also important. We need enough instability in the atmosphere that the smoke can rise, but not too much to create dangerous circumstances. We need enough wind to push the fire where we want it to go, but not too much.
Regeneration begins within weeks, sometimes even days. And just like it was before a century of fire suppression, wildlife reap the benefits.
There's a lot of tools out there that landowners have access to improve their property for wildlife. Among all those tools, fire is one of the most versatile, it's one of the most effective, and one of the most cost-effective. There are private companies that will come out and burn your property for you for a fee. Arkansas Forestry Commission will also do that, and they all do a great job. Private lands biologists, foresters, or rangers with Arkansas Forestry Commission can consult with you, develop a plan for you to use fire on your property, see what your property needs there. But the first step is to contact either a private lands biologist or a Forestry Commission employee and take that first step to getting the plan together, figure out what you need, and figure out how we can make that happen.
Arkansas Wildlife is brought to you in part by the Arkansas Game and Fish Foundation. Support wildlife and conservation education in the natural state. Become a member today. If you were born after about 1970, you probably don't recall the golden age of Arkansas quail hunting. Northern bobwhite numbers fell drastically after a peak in the early 70s, mainly the result of drastic changes in the state's natural landscape. But the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission has embarked on an ambitious plan to bring back the bobwhite. To return Arkansas quail numbers anywhere near the levels that upland bird hunters enjoyed in the mid-20th century, we'll need to start with habitat.
Habitat is the key to our quail restoration efforts in Arkansas. It's the missing component, and it's the most needed component here.
Poor habitat lacks diverse vegetation and typically has thick stands of short grasses that provide little benefit to quail and other wildlife species. Good quail habitat will feature tall, clumping, native grasses with clusters of dense shrubs.
This is big blue stem, and it has this, like I said, a bunch form to it. It allows quail to travel around it like this, but they also will typically build their nests within this clump and use a lot of some of this dead material down here to actually make the nest.
The presence of forbs provides seeds for the birds and also attracts insects that bobwhites feed on. To create good quail habitat, landowners and land managers must manipulate habitat with tools such as timber thinning, prescribed fire, and disking. The Arkansas Game and Fish Commission's Private Lands program can help landowners achieve these goals by sharing their knowledge about creating better quail habitat. The program's biologist also can provide assistance to landowners by connecting them with federal and state programs and incentives that help offset the cost of creating good quail habitat.
Private land biologist is a very important asset. They can come out to your property, kind of take a tour of it basically, and look over what you actually have, what components you have, what's maybe probably the missing link in having more quail on your property.
Once good habitat is in place, it usually doesn't take long for the quail to find it. Just ask David Baker, who used prescribed fire and timber thinning on his land north of Conway.
The first thing happened after we burned the first unit of this place, the quail showed back up. And I mean, as we hadn't heard quail on the place in probably 20 years.
To understand how effective proper habitat management can be, just consider the case of Sebastian County's Ben Guerin Golf Course in Fort Smith. Located in an urban setting, the course began a plan 2 years ago to restore native prairie on the edges of the course and in the rough areas outside of fairways.
The main purpose is to preserve the flora and fauna that only exist in a tallgrass prairie ecosystem.
Although the work is taking place on mostly small blocks of just a few acres, quail numbers are already on the rise.
He's kind of right down there. Like you were saying earlier too, wasn't it just a year ago you didn't hear quail very much at all?
No, that's exactly right.
And just that fast in 1 year, we've got a multitude of quail that the last 3 or 4 times that I've been here, you can hear them consistently whistling, and they love it, and that's a good thing for sure.
Robert L. Hankins' Mud Creek Wildlife Management Area is one of the smaller properties in the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission's WMA system, but it's playing a big role in the agency's efforts to restore bobwhite quail in Arkansas. Located in Randolph County, about 10 miles north of Pocahontas, Mud Creek WMA covers just over 1,000 acres in the eastern Ozark foothills. The property was previously used as a cattle farm, but was deeded to Game and Fish through the Farmers Home Administration Program in 1989. About 40% of the area consists of forested upland hardwood timber, while the remaining acreage is more open land that's in various stages of regrowth. Game and Fish is actively managing the area to provide habitat for northern bobwhite quail and other small game species. In the past year alone, Game and Fish has mulched more than 300 acres of the old field system, setting the stage for the growth of native grasses, shrubs, and forbs that benefit bobwhites and numerous other species. Workers have eliminated more than 350 acres of undesirable grass species, conducted wildlife-friendly timber thinning, and implemented prescribed fire on nearly 500 acres. It's all part of a plan to make Mud Creek a haven for northern bobwhite quail. But Mud Creek isn't just about quail restoration. The area also offers good opportunities for archery deer hunting and spring turkey hunting. Small game opportunities include rabbit and squirrel hunting, and the area is an excellent venue for bird watching, hiking, and wildlife photography. To access Mud Creek WMA, take the county road off Arkansas 115 at Middlebrook and follow the WMA directional signs. For maps and more information, visit agfc.com. Today we're going to cook sugarcane lacquered quail. This is an approximation of a dish that I had at Commander's Palace, famous restaurant in New Orleans, a few weeks ago. I took one bite of that quail and said, I've got to try this in the kitchen at home. We're going to use a technique called sous vide. Now, we're not going to go into a lot of detail this week. We're going to talk more about it on a future episode, but it's a great way to cook wild game that tends to get dried out with conventional cooking methods. Sous vide is literally French for under vacuum. We've sealed with our Food Saver bags the birds in individual bags like this. You can also use conventional zip seal bags and remove as much air as possible. But what we've got here is a water immersion heater circulator that's the cooking method. And this pumps warm water, recirculates through here, and it keeps it at a precise temperature. In this case, 140 degrees. And we've put some Cajun seasoning and on the birds, stuffed them with a little boudin sausage. Got them sealed up there. We're gonna cook these for about 2 hours, and they will not dry out with this cooking method. We're gonna finish it on the grill later, but this is a great thing to do with all sorts of game. This water circulator immersion cooking device, commonly referred to as a precision cooker, has Bluetooth, so I can sync it with my phone, set it for 2 hours, set the timer, and we're good to go. And it'll let me know as soon as it's ready to take it out. While our quail are cooking in the water bath, we're gonna do a couple of things. We're gonna make our glaze, our sugarcane glaze, as well as a little sweet and spicy dipping sauce. And we're also going to braise some cabbage that we're gonna use when we plate the quail. We're gonna start our glaze by browning the wings and necks that we cut off the quail when we prepared it. We're not actually gonna use those pieces. That's really just gonna provide a flavor base for this. And then we're going to add a 1/4 cup of this rum. Deglaze the pan with your rum, and really you wanna let that rum cook down. We're not looking for the alcohol, we just want the essence. After the rum cooks down a little bit, we're gonna add a 1/2 cup of the sugarcane syrup, and then a 1/2 cup of our molasses, and finally a 1/2 cup of the coffee. We're gonna get that all blended and hot, and we're gonna let that reduce by about half. One of the finishing touches on this dish is gonna be a little spicy and sweet dipping sauce, and we're gonna start with about a cup of Crystal Louisiana style hot sauce. To that, we're going to add 2 teaspoons of apple cider vinegar, and then 1 tablespoon of regular granulated sugar. We're gonna dissolve all that, let it cook over a low to medium heat until it also starts to reduce, becomes almost like a little syrup. We're gonna serve the quail atop this braised cabbage. We've just julienned some cabbage as well as some red onion, cooked a couple of strips of bacon to render out the fat, took the bacon out. I sprinkled it with a little bit of white wine vinegar as well as some salt and pepper. And we're gonna cook it until it gets nice and caramelized. Those juices start to cook out, and that'll be a nice little bed for us to place our quail on top of when we finish this dish. We've moved outside to the PK grill. When you cook sous vide, you do have to brown the meat to finish it, either in a skillet, on the stovetop, under the broiler, or in this case on the grill. We're gonna put some nice marks on it and also caramelize that sugarcane glaze on the outside of these quail. And we're gonna get into that nice glaze there. Just paint that right on. Ooh, what you talking about? You see why they call it lacquered, sugarcane lacquered, because it really does look a lot like you're working on wood here. Doesn't take much at all. Get your nice marks on there. Paint this side. Bit of our sauce, and there you have it, sugarcane glazed quail with braised cabbage.
Arkansas Wildlife presents the Watch and Win giveaway. During each episode of Arkansas Wildlife, we'll give away an Arkansas resident hunting and fishing license. At the end of this season, we'll be giving away $500 worth of hunting gear with everything you need for your next hunting adventure. It's all provided by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Visit the Arkansas Wildlife webpage and enter at arkansaswildlife.com. This week's winner is Eric Lee from Fayetteville. Congratulations and thanks for watching.